Good afternoon. Welcome to Latinidad and the vaccine for racism. Welcome to the afternoon session. It's 9 o'clock, but I'm glad that you've chosen this workshop to attend. Before I get started, I just wanted to thank you all for taking the time out of your day to be here with me. I also wanted to acknowledge that in this workshop session that embodies great hope, that right now there is happening in the world great suffering, especially the suffering of the Palestinian people, the crisis in Sudan, the crisis in Congo, Haiti, Ecuador, and many other places. And these are people and communities that I'm holding very closely in mind and spirit as I give this presentation. Colonization is real and it is very close. Because in addition to my hope for liberation for them, I do this practice because of my hope for climate justice in the climate crisis. And as a brown person in the world where white is a standard, white is the standard, that I'm able to identify any opportunity that I can be part of the conversation. I also wanted to give acknowledgement about the limitations of the word Latinidad. I think many folks use the word Latinidad to describe the vastness of the Latino community, and the same goes for the word Latinx. However, as many of you might already affirm, it's not practical to encapsulate all of these cultures, all of these countries, and all of these communities into one word, though my aim is a continuous understanding and acknowledgement of the immense diversity within our communities. So in this workshop, you will see art, you will see quotes. This is very characteristic of the Racial Equity Consciousness Institute. And as I tailored this to my audience, also through many of my intersecting identities and the lenses through those intersecting identities, I chose Chicano art. My mom bought me a great book, actually 2 books of Chicano art, and I was flipping through them and found many of the pieces you'll see today. We'll start with this first quote by Dolores Huerta. And she says, quote, "Every moment is an organizing opportunity. Every person, a potential activist. Every minute, a chance to change the world." So this is a little bit about me. My name is Gabriel Flores Quinteros. I'm a master's student, a second-year joint degree master's student at the University of Pittsburgh in the Schools of Public Health and Social Work. I'm a graduate assistant in the Center on Race and Social Problems, and it has been with the center that I've connected to the institute that I'll talk about, and the work that has led me to this presentation today. As a second-year social work student, my second-year field placement internship is with UPMC's Western Psychiatric Institute and their clinic, or Western Psychiatric Institute and Clinic, with their Department of Addiction Medicine Services. And it's there that I do supervised group therapy, individual therapy, because part of my professional goals are to become a licensed clinical social worker. Here are my goals and hopes. To share some of my goals in this workshop is to provide a introductory presentation on what I experienced as both a participant and a facilitator of the Racial Equity Consciousness Institute. And that is a mouthful. I will say RECI, I will say the Institute, I will say Racial Equity Consciousness Institute. They all kind of mean the same thing, this practice, this work. I believe that the dialogues and the structured cognitive behavioral training that happened and happens in the Institute are experiences that many people can benefit from. And it was in these workshops that I began to liberate myself from my internalized racism. And it was also in these workshops that I saw the duality of whiteness and blackness However, not so much brownness. And so as a person, as a Latino myself, as a Chicano, I really wanted to bring this to our communities, Latinx populations and communities. My hope would be that this is a starting off point, that all of you here present with me today would see me much as a learner as you are. So when I try to psych myself up and motivate myself to facilitate a session just like this one, I'm very intentional that while I'm the person starting the conversation, so I'm the one that's first opening my mouth to do some talking, it does not make me the expert. It just makes me the first person to start talking. And my hope would be that you can identify something within yourself or something within your past or your future where these types of conversations and this type of practice, perhaps it's the first time you've ever thought about or ever heard about racial equity. Maybe you've been doing this work for a very long time. My goal is to invite you to join me in this conversation and this practice, as well as for you to invite me into the conversations that you're having and the practices that you've been a part of. I encourage you to take notes. There are videos I've included in this presentation. Take note of what stands out to you. Bias and limitation. So I am not the expert. I've already kind of established that. And that's got to be one of my first limitations. And it's also a huge weight off of my shoulders. And I also hope that it's an olive branch to you, inviting you a bit closer into what this could all mean. I'm Mexican American, I'm Chicano, Hispanic, Latinx, Latino, but I'm, in terms of the country of origin or my roots, they're from Mexico. I cannot speak to the experience of being any other nationality within the Latino or ethnicity within the Latino community. My citizenship. I am a citizen of the US and I cannot speak to the immigrant experience other than what I have observed and learned from working with the immigrant population. Geography. So I grew up in a semi-rural part of Texas, or the panhandle of Texas. I'd say semi-rural because there are large cities in the panhandle. But this part of Texas is far away from the Mexican-American border, and it was, or the Mexican-US border. And it was in moving to more densely populated cities in Texas that I realized things in the community, things about the community that I grew up in, its deficits as well as its strengths. In terms of geography, currently, I'm living in Pittsburgh for my graduate studies. I'm adaptive and considerate that these conversations that we're having today, or that we were going to try to have today, will look different in Dallas, Texas. It'll look different in the panhandle of Texas and in the Rio Grande Valley. Language is another bias and limitation. I am a non-native speaker of Spanish. English is my first language, Spanish is my second language. I can speak to the stigma I have experienced being a non-native speaker and share with some humor about it. And this is one of the lenses through which I show up in a space like the Racial Equity Consciousness Institute. All right, so where are we going? Where we're headed? I have divided today's presentation up into 3 chapters. Chapter 1, what is RECI? RECI, or RECI, stands for the Racial Equity Consciousness Institute. I'm going to give you an overview of what we learn in the Institute. I'm going to provide mental models for you to absorb and to look at. And I will show you a little bit about how I show up as a facilitator. I'm doing that kind of right now. It is important for me to give you this introductory presentation because this is if not the, it is a foundation in this practice. And this is what I believe we can bring to Latino communities. Depending on who I'm talking to, though, I can immediately flow into a conversation about colorism or about internalized racism. One of those people is my tia in Oregon. However, someone like another tia in Texas, there's a memory I have where she kind of questioned and was puzzled at a Black Lives Matter sign in my parents' house. I'm not quite sure that I could easily flow into a conversation about internalized racism with her. So in this work, so that's why I believe a foundation is necessary for many audiences. And it's in this workshop that it's also up to us to identify in our communities of influence, our communities of influence, at what level do we present this type of practice? Is it starting at square one, like the RISI framework that we're going to get into a little bit? Or is it a few steps down the road, just flowing into a conversation about colorism? Chapter 2, why specifically for diverse Latina, Latino, Latine populations? So this is where my bias might surface. One small anecdote is that I worked at Catholic Charities of Dallas in an immigration firm as a paralegal from 2016 to 2018. And we helped people from many countries. However, it was there that stigma, entitlement, and other things started to surface amongst the conversation amongst the caseworkers and paralegals. And I started to think then about the stratification, the fracture within our diverse Latine communities. So more on that in chapter 2. And then in chapter 3, this is where you as all participants here, again, thank you for joining, will have an opportunity to unmute if you feel comfortable and practice and dialogue. And I'll help explain parts of the Institute in chapter 1 that you'll get to practice in chapter 3. All right. Well, let's get started. Chapter 1, what is RISI? What is the Racial Equity Consciousness Institute? James Baldwin says, quote, "A complex thing can't be made simple. You simply have to try to deal with it in all its complexity and hope to get that complexity across." All right, so this is one of the first slides. If you are a participant, which we invite you, if this is something you'd like to bring to your community of influence, to your organization, contact us. I'll give you my contact information at the end of the presentation, but this is one of the first slides you'll see in RISI, in the Institute. So consciousness is generally defined as the state of being mindfully aware of sensitive or sensitive to something. Another way of defining it is the full activity of the mind or senses. This state of mind is necessary to develop diversity consciousness, which is understanding, awareness, and skills in the area of diversity. You'll see here underneath illuminating the vaccine for racism. This is the title that our founding director, Ron Ndoko, gave to the Institute. It's a stark title, the vaccine for racism. I often ask folks, how does that land with you? What is your reaction to that? I always welcome that feedback. And then below the title, you have instituting a structured cognitive behavioral training framework to develop grounded, personal, and collective racial equity consciousness. So this is a learner-oriented diversity education series, and it's focused on addressing anti-Black racism. The foundation is, and my goal is to broaden this to anti-Brown racism within our communities, and still anti-Black racism. And this education series also positions diversity consciousness development as never ending. It's a lifelong process that requires intentionality, self-reflection, and evaluation, patience, practice, steadfast commitment, and communal engagement. Whoops, I went forward too fast. But actually, I was kind of wrapped up with that slide. And then the lantern, the logo. The logo is an ode and an honor and acknowledgement of the Underground Railroad, Harriet Tubman lighting the way. So this was designed by a Pittsburgh-based BIPOC artist, and you'll see this logo throughout. Again, this is what RISI is about, and we're going to move into. I'm going to give you a 5-minute. This is our first video, and I thought it was good to give you this short introduction. It's the trailer, actually. So there was a film that was filmed in 2023 where folks can watch this 30 to 45-minute film about what happens in RISI. Now, we don't have that time here today, but I thought this would give you a good idea and a good feel of what it sounds like, what it looks like, what people, and also I've chosen a lot of these videos because, as you can see, I'm the only presenter today, and I want you to hear from other people, because that is so much of what this community building practice is about sharing diverse engagements and dialogues. So I'm going to mute myself, optimize the sound, and we'll move into the first video.
So I want to talk about the Racial Equity Consciousness Institute. Racism, just like any other system of oppression, works in a way that positions people with certain identities to experience marginalization, to experience unfair outcomes.
I'm just excited that RISI is a part of the work of the Center on Race and Social Problems. I'm quite hopeful, again, that as people go through it, that they will be changed and that our society will be better.
We frequently ask people what their race is. What do we intend to do with that? And what does it mean when someone says what their race is?
It can be difficult to figure out where to start.
My tendency is to want to just avoid that conversation.
RISI brings to the university the tools and ability to allow space for these difficult conversations to be had.
I speak from experience because that was my journey.
When individuals participate in this dialogue, they advance the spheres of influence that they have.
Racial trauma has impact on one's psychological wellness, emotional wellness, and their physical wellness.
That trauma is collective and it is very much lasting for our generation.
America has a storied history, and that storied history includes a history of racism and a history of slavery. We can't separate what's happened historically to what's happening in the context now.
So they're going to help us really foster meaningful conversation as we engage throughout this experience. Illuminating the vaccine for racism.
Watching that video really just reminded me of the first time I was called the N-word.
How we do that? Instituting a structural, cognitive, behavioral training framework to embody grounded, personal, and collective racial equity consciousness. This work indeed positions us to see everyone for who they are fully.
RISI really kind of gets us to those various sort of stratospheres of how to do the work.
We need to understand the influence that we're having on each other.
The goal is to build from where you are. What is core for each of us is our story. So again, I'm going to ask you to be time travelers.
You can learn so much from other people's stories and their experiences.
People get stronger in their ability to talk about difficult conversations.
Our goal today is to engage in open, meaningful exchange.
It feels like sometimes things are getting better, but are they really?
We're not homogenous.
What I really hope that RISI will do for the University of Pittsburgh is to make Pitt a beacon.
There seems to be even national interest in it now. It's exciting to see that people are really interested in addressing and having conversations about race.
The Racial Equity Consciousness Institute, our focus, again, is really on working to eradicate racism.
How do we put things into action?
Having tools that we can now use in the spaces that we hold, professionally, but also personally, I think is really enriching.
The model is so comprehensive.
It has significantly changed me as a person and made me appreciate and realize the impact that race and racism has on so many people.
It's important for me to be knowledgeable, to also believe in the work, so that I can also help prepare those who will be taking this work on.
Through RISI, I've learned to hold space for alternate views of my own.
Anytime people come together to talk about big foundational issues in society, there's the opportunity to make positive change.
What is happening to people emotionally, psychologically?
Our struggle is not the struggle of a day, a week, a month, or a year. It's the struggle of a lifetime.
RISI really brings that work forward but it does it in a way it's not threatening.
It's providing us a community to connect.
RISE is timeless, actually, because every day that you participate in and every day that you check in with yourself, you learn something new.
It all kind of connected for me.
Because at the end of the day, there's no doubt in my mind that everybody who participates in RISE, particularly here at a university, they're fighting the good fight and they want to make change in the world.
And I think there's a lot that can be done in this space.
These conversations are so crucial.
This is the perfect time for RISE.
People are starting to see, okay, there might be ways that we can do this.
RISE creates a powerful platform that provides hope to individuals who are working towards the advancement of social justice.
I hope that the work that we do evolves and it manifests into so many forms that are matching the progress of our generation.
It changes everyone that it touches.
The mission is not to be not racist, it's to be anti-racist.
I have never encountered a framework of this kind that is both deep and general.
I never really learned how to be sensitive and aware of all the things about diversity that are enriching.
In this space is super timely.
We need to ask those very tough questions.
The possibilities here are endless.
Very excited for what's to come. For those folks out there watching, know that I'm prepared, just as you are, to affect change for a world in which we can all live to our fullest lives.
All right. So that last gentleman you saw was founding director of the Racial Equity Consciousness Institute, Ronnie Doko. He is also my boss, associate director for the Center on Race and Social Problems, and inspiring many people for sure. So this next slide is about RISE at a glance. What you kind of saw in the video, the trailer, was the breakout sessions. Really, I should probably start at the beginning though. So RISE happens over the course of 2 to 3 hour, but sometimes mostly 2 hour sessions where we engage. There's didactics, there's learning, there's sharing. So 7 main sessions. RISE also uses mental models, which we are about to get into in chapter 1 here. Mental models help people absorb and think about complex things in simpler ways. That's the goal. RISE uses resources, so quotes, media. I'm using a lot of artwork in mind. I've always envisioned using artwork. And it's not to say that I haven't seen it before, because definitely you saw the lantern, and the artist who created the lantern logo, her artwork is all over the Institute. It was important for me to find Chicano artists for this session. And journaling is something that we really not harp on, but we really encourage folks to journal, to engage with their own level of consciousness. So whether that's taking a phone out and typing it on a keyboard, pen to paper, voice, text, whatever it needs to be, try to push beyond that discomfort to journal and tap into your consciousness or your unconsciousness as well. And then the breakout sessions. Oftentimes, this can happen, RISE can happen virtually, kind of like we're doing now. So in Zoom, there are breakout rooms that people can join. But when folks are in person, they are at tables of like 3 to 4 to 5 people at a table and in their group, and it can be really impactful and meaningful. And that's probably where the transformations of the Institute can really happen, is in that dialogue. All right, so let's start. We're still in chapter 1 of this presentation, and this is the structured cognitive behavioral training framework. Our leading, I would say, scholar and an author in the Institute, one of them for sure, is Bell Hooks. And Bell Hooks says, quote, "There must exist a paradigm, a practical model for social change that includes an understanding of ways to transform consciousness that are linked to efforts to transform structures." So I'll invite you to kind of take this first mental model in. This is the framework really of what happens in RISE. It's an iterative systems thinking process. an intervention as well that's designed to help individuals and communities actively develop and embody distinct cognitive behavioral traits toward racial equity through structured training and practice. So central to the SCBT framework for racial equity consciousness development is the active engagement of the cyclical process of research, education, and praxis. So around the circumference of those circles, you'll see the arrows. Then in the middle, you'll see these circles that each have a title with them, 2 titles. And then in the ring in the middle, you've got dispositions, knowledge, skills, and awareness. These all make up the development and the developing of racial equity consciousness. Ron named these bilateral spheres of consciousness development, and there are 6 of them. There are 7 sessions. The first session is going to be of RISI as the introduction, as an overview, kind of like what you're getting today in a snippet, in a nutshell. And then the remaining 6 sessions are diving into these 6 interconnected bilateral spheres of consciousness development. And they're born from the pairing of reciprocal equity consciousness behaviors. And they represent virtuous feedback loops in which embodying the racial equity consciousness cognitive behaviors through ongoing reflection, education, and praxis fosters positive reinforcing effects. And then the concentric nature of the process assumes that individuals and communities can continuously grow their dispositions, so that ring in the middle, their dispositions, their knowledge, their awareness, and skills towards racial equity, their racial equity consciousness as they engage across each sphere. So it's a mouthful, it's a lot. This is why we devote the whole entire first session of the 6 sessions or 7 sessions to what this means for folks. So engagement principles. How do we actually talk with folks? The Dalai Lama says, quote, "The reality today is that we are all interdependent and have to coexist on this small planet. Therefore, the only sensible and intelligent way of resolving differences and clashes of interest, whether between individuals or nations, is through dialogue." And how do we do that? Well, in RISI, we invite and encourage folks to consider these. There are 13 of them. I'll read them off. So number 1, the first engagement principle, when we're dialoguing with folks, create a supportive space for guided perspective sharing and thoughtful perspective taking. So in chapter 3 of today's presentation, if you feel so well inclined to unmute or to put something in the chat, keep this in mind. We want to create a supportive space. Be as open and as honest as you feel you can be. Aim to grow your comfort zone. Number 3, respect each person's right to be heard. Engage to understand, not to respond. 4, realize that we are all teachers and learners. I think you heard me say something at the beginning of this session, of this workshop, akin to that. Number 5, be an active participant. However, remember that we participate in different ways. Who here in this workshop likes to be judged? Raise your hand now, rhetorically. That's a question that Ron often asks in the Institute. It gets some laughs because, oh, actually, I skipped. I'm looking at the wrong thing. So my bad. Number 6, engage even when it's challenging. Distinguish discomfort versus danger. Number 7 is reserve judgment. I missed my cue there. No worries. Number 8, focus on the behavior rather than the person. I really appreciate this one. Number 9, emphasize personal experiences and perspectives. Prioritize I statements. 10, be mindful of identity taxation. If this is the first time you've heard or considered identity taxation, I'll share a little anecdote. So I'm a queer person in the LGBTQ community. However, I do not represent all folks in the queer community, in the LGBTQIA+ community. And so I share my perspectives, But if I find myself being asked, or if I'm the go-to person always, that can feel kind of taxing. So we want to be mindful of that, especially in this practice. Number 11, be wary of bad faith or off-track engagement. So what does bad faith engagement look like? Somebody may just want to disrupt for disruption's sake. Be wary of that. And then off-track engagement can seem as innocent as talking about what I'm going to do this weekend. I mean, I could tell you, everybody here, but what a disservice that would be to get off track when I really want to talk about anti-racism, about liberation. So if you find yourself in RISI or engaging in this practice, just be mindful of that. I mean, it does take a lot of energy, but it's okay to take breaks. Check in with yourself. Maybe you need a break at some point. And number 13, trust that honest, thoughtful, interactive dialogue will help advance collective understanding and growth. So I'd invite you to consider 1 or 2 principles that you would want to put extra attention to. No need to unmute now or anything like that. And maybe later on in chapter 3 of the workshop, you can share what 1 or 2 of these stood out to you. All right. So reorienting our consciousness towards racial equity. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, quote, "Our goal is to create a beloved community, and this will require a qualitative change in our souls as well as a quantitative change in our lives." And then there's a quote from Race Forward, quote, "Racial equity is a process of eliminating racial disparities and improving outcomes for everyone. It is the intentional and continual practice of changing policies, practices, systems, and structures by prioritizing measurable change in the lives of people of color. Racial equity is the process for moving towards the vision of racial justice." And then racial equity consciousness. These are the dispositions, the knowledge, awareness, and skills that empower us to contemplate and cultivate racial equity. But let's lean into that a little bit more because it still might seem a little bit distant. That's where the mental models come in. So racial equity dispositions. What is a disposition? I found myself asking Ron that a lot because I didn't feel tethered or anchored in anything. A disposition can be an attitude. It can be a belief. It can be a motivation. So I am motivated here. I'm passionate about bringing this to Latino communities. And a disposition can also be can be values that guide an individual's or community's approach to achieving racial equity. What about racial equity knowledge? The understanding of the historical, social, political, and cultural contexts that contribute to racial disparities and inequalities. Racial equity awareness, being conscious of the pervasive nature of racism, the existence of racial inequities, the impact of these inequities, and opportunities to cultivate racial equity. And then racial equity skills. I feel like I'm strengthening my skill right now. I'm flexing that muscle, not to brag, not in a bragging side of way, but like I'm getting to, in terms of practice my skills and the practical ability and competencies necessary for individuals and communities to effectively promote and advance racial equity. And our next quote from Peter Sang is, quote, "Through learning, we recreate ourselves. Through learning, we become able to do something we never were able to do. Through learning, we re-perceive the world and our relationship to it. Through learning, we extend our capacity to create, to be a part of the generative process of life." Another mental model, checking my time, and I think I'm doing all right. And I just wanted to, in terms of the learning community, take a note of these pieces of the pie, I guess you could say. A shared vision. Do we all have a shared vision, or can we find a shared vision to engage in this practice? Do you desire personal mastery, or do you just want to learn? Mental models, are they helpful? Cohort learning. Members work together to identify and address racial equity issues within the community. And then this is a systems thinking approach that's employed to address interconnected racial inequities. And then community building. Definitely connections are made. Walls are lowered or are brought down metaphorically in people's lives. This is definitely a community building practice. And so as I wrap up chapter 1 here, our next slide is about a growth mindset. So in the first session of RECE, we really try to encourage folks to start or to plant the seeds for a growth mindset. But what does that look like? Because it's key to consciousness development. Carol Dweck says, quote, "Mindset change is not about picking up a few pointers here and there. It's about seeing things in a new way. When people change to a growth mindset, they change from a judge and be judged framework to a learn and help learn framework. Their commitment is to growth, and growth takes plenty of time, effort, and mutual support." We've got another mental model. So we've got the anti-racism fixed to growth mindset, from comfortable to courageous. Kind of take note of what stands out. I'll read the second and the third and the fourth one. So if I'm comfortable and I'm in a fixed mindset, I might say something like, I don't want to get it wrong or get called out. However, I can change that or reframe my approach and acknowledge I'm going to make mistakes, no doubt about it. I will be grateful for the lesson. So if there'll be a survey at the end of this workshop that I hope you'll be able to take the QR code from. And if there's something I can improve on, if I misstepped, I am willing to receive that constructive, hopefully, feedback. And then the fourth one, I don't get involved in politics. I don't have time. A more growth or courageous approach would be, this is a human rights issue. This matters. I will make time. This is definitely why I submitted a proposal for this workshop. I believe that this matters. So I'm just going to invite you to consider, how might adopting a growth mindset position you to overcome your fears, challenges, and embrace your hopes and opportunities in engaging matters of race and racism? All right, so we made it to chapter 1. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I'll do my best. I noticed, you might have noticed that the video was pausing. I tried to look at the chat and to see who all was attending, but it just made the video stop playing. So I'll do my best to acknowledge those if they come through. But let's move into chapter 2, the why. Why RECE for Latinx populations, for diverse Latinx populations? So I've got a piece from a poem. Quote, "I look at myself and I see a part of me who rejects my father and my mother and dissolves into the melting pot to disappear in shame. I sometimes sell my brother out and reclaim him for my own when society gives me token leadership in society's own name." And that's Rodolfo Jorge Gonzalez from his poem, I Am Joaquin. All right, so I wanted to remind you that this is the framework we're working on, and we're going to focus on one of these circles, the purple circle, or more in line with what you'll hear in the Institute, the purple sphere of embodiment. So we're going to hyper-focus on that one for a minute as we look at how can RECE, what is one of my visions of how RECE and the Racial Equity Consciousness Institute can connect and thrive in the Latinx audience. Not solely that, but again, it's tailored. My approach is tailored to the Latinx community. So here is a different take, a more zoomed in version, mental model of the sphere of embodiment. So you'll see around the circumference of the circle, reflection, education, praxis. you will see dispositions, knowledge, skills, awareness. All those things are happening within this sphere of embodiment as they are in the greater whole of the Institute. So in examining racial identities and addressing racial biases, this is one of my favorite parts of the series. This involves a deep introspection into how one's race and the associated societal narratives shape their experiences, perspectives, and interactions in the world or with the world. These traits include reflecting on how one's racial identity has afforded privileges or imposed challenges. This is recognizing the complex influences of race on a personal and societal identity and social identity. It also includes questioning and deconstructing internalized racial biases and stereotypes. So perhaps it's internalized racism for folks. It's also seeking to understand the historical and cultural context of one's racial identity and its impact on self-perception and behavior. And I just thought this was a great place to get the juices flowing in terms of ideas and our motivations. So my first topic is colorism. I've got a definition, I got some artwork, I've got an opinion piece from Al Jazeera. The opinion piece is Mexico and the Unbearable Whiteness of Advertising. Ron, who I mentioned earlier, went to Mexico City for the first time and experienced the cognitive discourse that I experienced when I first went to Mexico City in 2009. We got a chat. Let's see here. Oh, got it. Okay. So, yeah, Ron went to Mexico City recently, and when I first went, the majority of people that I was connecting with had melanin like me, had the same skin tone like me. But my friends and their families of the upper class that I was visiting, they did not look like me. The people in their homes, when they were serving us dinner and taking our plates away, those people looked like me, but the families did not. And so there was this break, this cognitive distance where I was like, I feel so much joy to be in Mexico, but I'm so confused what's going on. So one definition of colorism is prejudice or discrimination, especially within a racial or ethnic group, favoring people with lighter skin over those with darker skin. And I chose this piece, Dulces, from John Valdez, because, I mean, in my interpretation, it's a Latina with blonde hair. I think that's beautiful. And I also wonder what motivates Latinas to dye their hair blonde or bleach their hair blonde. I'm sure many people have talked about it, but this is somehow I incorporate colorism into racial equity consciousness. So we're going to move into our next video. It's about 6 minutes long. Because I want you to hear from other folks. And the best way to do that in this setting is to give you a video. So I'll mute myself, optimize the sound, and I'll see you in a few minutes.
I don't think that white people can experience racism in the same way.
I agree. So you see me as a white person?
I do.
Oh, we all agreed. That's good. Starting out
That's
nice.
a good start.
Let
Good
the drama
start.
begin.
I don't hear about it as often anymore, but there's this soap called Conchanacar.
Little Veracruz.
Yeah.
That's shit,
That,
though.
you know, your family will be like, oh, you should maybe bathe with this and see if it'll lighten you up a little bit. So definitely a lot of that.
As the queen of Whitexicans, I also have been told repeatedly to stay away from the sun, but it's because I then turn really red. Red, yes.
My family there's different spectrums, like they're all from the same dad, the same mom,
And it's like we have the people that look more indigenous and we have the people that look more Spanish like. So it's like even within like brothers and sisters, I feel like in our own families we even see that sort of like difference, like, oh, let's está más güerito, like, oh, like, oh, you know, like, oh, stay out of the sun and stuff like that. So I completely understand where you're going from.
What did we say?
I mean, having, you know, Afro-Latino friends and darker skinned friends, a lot of the times I was not even aware of my privilege until I would be in situations together with them or going to a bar, and I would have no problem getting in, and then my best friend would have a problem because he was dark, and they would say it's a private party and things like that, and I'm like, this is insane. And then you hear their stories, and it's like, God, I would never understand what you're going through. I could not even begin to understand it. And then you realize how messed up it is. And then you come to the US, and then you may experience racism. But even though you still are treated better than your Afro-Latino friends.
In LA, I will often get compared to the working class. And so like I'll go to nice places and I will always kind of be seen like as a help automatically, like by white people. Like I remember going to Erewhon, if you guys know where that's at. Yes. Bougie store. And then this lady approaches me and she's like, hey, I need help getting this item. And I'm like just I look at her and I look at what I'm wearing and I'm like, I thought I was dressed nice today. Like I thought I was studying. And then I was like, I'm sorry, I don't work here. And this happens to me kind of often.
I'll never forget one time in acting school, someone said, oh yeah, and because you're brown. And I was like, am I brown? And they were like, yeah. And I was like, oh, yeah. But back home, I'm blanquita, so I had like this, for a second, disconnect, and I was like, oh yeah, I am brown. Especially here, I'm super brown. But sometimes because of that colorism and those, you know, remarks, you sometimes think that you're something that you're not.
I feel like I didn't assume I was brown till I came to America, and suddenly there's like a wider spectrum. So anyone that goes under the sun and turns to brown is immediately brown for them.
For sure. And then like how far are you going to take the concept of brown? Because like, for example, I'm not even considered white within a group of people, and this group of people only consider white people to be like Scandinavians. You all lived your own experiences that relate to your social and your cultural upbringings. And that's what kind of makes the ideas and the concepts that you attach the superficiality of color and pigmentation, which is what we're talking about. It's so ignorant, this whole subject matter, and the fact that you grow up in a space where you're being told you don't belong because of color and because of our last name and because of our accents have been forced.
For you to be able to say this subject matter is ignorant and it's only pigmentation, I think that alone in itself is privilege.
But I didn't say that.
But you did. You
said...
No,
I didn't say it's only that. That's how you interpreted what I said.
Well, those are literally the words that I heard.
But
I literally heard you say it's only pigmentation and where you grew up.
Well, it's a part of it, the cultural aspect of the ideas.
For you, it might just be the idea, right, or the social context of it. But for others, it's literally what their life was about. It's real privilege to be able to say that, because while you may have encountered discrimination because of your proximity to brownness, it's a very different experience. I've gotten pulled over and the cop has asked me how many times I've been in jail. And I've had to say, how many times? Like, are you assuming that I've been in jail because I'm brown? And I think when somebody, to me, that identifies as brown, and if I were to see them walking in the street, I would not. For me personally, from my background and my experiences, it's difficult for me to hear.
You use this example of being pulled over because you're brown. Well, try driving in Tijuana as a white person and see what happens with the cops over there. You don't have to apologize.
It almost sounded like what you were referencing was reverse racism, which to me is not a real thing. It can be bigotry, it can be biased, if you will, but I don't think that white people can experience racism in the same way.
I agree.
So you see me as a white person?
I do.
I fully understand that it's your experience.
The similarity here, racism
colorism, they are both rooted in white supremacy, right? They're both, at the end of the day, contributing to the funnel of white supremacy. However, racism is perpetuated by people who are in control in terms of government, social class, all of that stuff. So, there is the idea that I do agree with, that people of color cannot be racist. We can only be colorist and prejudiced. And you can be prejudiced against anyone. So colorism to me falls under prejudice, which is what we're discussing among our own people.
All right. So if like me, that might have been the first time you saw that. That was like the third time I watched that. If you felt a little something, a little, by osmosis, the ooh, that's okay. That's definitely, we want to distinguish discomfort versus danger. I don't think any of those folks are in danger, but that's the kind of conversation that we can have within this framework. And I really appreciated all their experiences. Even the two gentlemen, or the two folks who were essentially talking about color blindness, and the other one was saying, I don't know how, reverse racism. Anyway, not to give you my take on the experience, but I just thought that was really important. And I'm sharing with you again the mental model, because what we're doing here is we're examining racial identities and we're addressing racial biases. Our awareness, we are practicing our awareness around this. What are your dispositions about this? Maybe you have some. All right, so moving along into the second topic. I've got two main topics in chapter 2. Language. Got some artwork by Frank Ibarra, and I even have a quote from this Chicano artist. When I was a child, speaking Spanish was not prevalent in my family, nor was practicing the traditions and rituals of my native culture. This is not to say that we were trying to disassociate ourselves from our heritage, but rather I think it might have been my family's attempt to fit in with our suburban surroundings. Therefore, my work is, in a lighthearted manner, a tribute to my suburban ethnic upbringing. We've got another piece by Mr. Ibarra. And then language. What am I asking you? What am I inviting you to consider? What are some biases related to the Spanish language that you might have or might have processed through, might be still at a certain point? One, as a non-native speaker myself, I can give you a little bit of insight into how I approach this. I used to try to perfect my accent. And I almost want to like flex and show you that I can speak in Spanish, and I no longer have to do that, no longer feel that desire because of this work. Colonization. Because, well, it kind of peaked, this epiphany, I guess, was helped by the Marvel Studio movies, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. In the second Black Panther movie, Wakanda Forever, there are Mexican indigenous characters. And one of them, if not the main character, speaks about the colonizer's tongue. So whenever I was able to realize like, yo, I'm trying to perfect this language that is not even mine, what is below it? ¿Cuáles son mis raíces? What are my roots? This really helped me reapproach and reframe what I was trying to assimilate to with my language. And I felt that working at Catholic Charities of Dallas. I felt that if I didn't speak Spanish perfectly, were you gonna give me the time of day? I also worked as a sales insurance agent for Humana and then Aetna. But if I couldn't talk and give you a presentation in pristine Spanish, which I still kind of battle with, like pushing through that I wasn't worthy. So geography. My part of Texas, or the part of Texas that my parents still live in, and a lot of my family lives in, Spanglish is ubiquitous. And I used to kind of, there's a lot of flack that people get when they hear Spanglish, depending on what, of course, my lens is Mexican-American Chicano. But when we hear Spanglish, or when folks hear Spanglish, it's either you celebrate it or you criticize it. I have learned to embrace it, and to, when I hear my dad and my tias talking in Spanglish, it just blows my mind, because it's almost more difficult for me to try and accomplish that versus just saying everything in Spanish or everything in English. And they do it so flawlessly. So that's what I mean by geography. That language and our positions in the world have an influence on that. And then reclamation. How do I reclaim my language at the ability that I want to? You'll see this video here in a second that kind of speaks to that. If you are a native speaker, if you are a non-native speaker, however you're showing up to this presentation with language, and I invite you to consider how you reclaimed it. All right, so second video, this is a really good one too. I'll mute, optimize the video or the sound, and I'll see you in this one's, I think, like 6 minutes as well.
Now to young Latino Americans. They're a generation born to Spanish speakers, but many don't speak fluent Spanish. We took a closer look at the stigma around language and what some are doing to include everyone in the conversation. This is Dr. Jose Medina.
For those of you that don't remember what chisme means, remember it means chisme.
A dual language expert using TikTok to destigmatize Spanglish.
Adios. I don't know what Spanglish speaker needs to hear this today, pero ahí les va. Don't ever apologize for being fabulous.
His page has more than 1 million likes.
Ay, pues mira. So I'm a published researcher, author, all of these things, but it's crazy. Like recently, what people know me for is TikTok, which is just loquísimo para mí that people have connected with the TikToks that I've created.
His videos cover a variety of tough cultural topics in the Latino community. One of the more popular subjects, Yo No Sabo kids.
Do you know what you just did? You moved planchando and you moved ironing and you combined them to say planching.
Yo no sabo is a twist on the phrase I don't know and has become a term for kids of Latino parents who have grown up in the United States and cannot speak Spanish fluently.
People often use that yo no sabo label, which is actually really destructive because what we're saying, in fact, is that these students that grew up in the United States but were never afforded an opportunity to strengthen that home language. Instead, they were forced to transition to English. Now we're ridiculing them and saying, oh, well, you don't know how to conjugate saber in Spanish, which is crazy because these students that we so often ridicule bring fabulousness in terms of their linguistic repertoire.
Some Latino children in the U.S. serve as their family's only liaison to American culture. Others have been discouraged from speaking Spanish at all. In 1918, several states made speaking any other language besides English in schools illegal. And these laws weren't repealed until Congress passed the Bilingual Education Act in 1968. But many Latino parents still encouraged their children to only speak English so they could assimilate into American culture.
I think that the reason that we have no sabo kids is because we felt oppression not just in schools, but also at home.
Meet Robert Aguilera. He had never heard of a Yo No Sabo kid. Robert grew up in a suburb of Rochester, New York, in a middle to upper class neighborhood. And although his parents, one Cuban and the other Puerto Rican, could speak Spanish, Robert never picked it up.
I think being in the suburban area I grew up in, I think it's just like hard to like incorporate that. Even if it is at home, it's just like, even when my parents went outside too, like they didn't have many opportunities to speak Spanish.
When did you decide that it was important to learn the language?
I was a senior in college. I had like just completely forgotten about Spanish. Like it just wasn't even on my radar at all. So I was just like, man, like I'm so sick of trying to like fit in. Like either I'm Latino or I'm like super American. Like it's one of the two. And I always felt like people were trying to push me to decide, and I got so frustrated with it. We went to Italy and I remember the last day we were there, we went to a bar and there were these two Cuban guys playing guitar. And I remember sitting at the table and I was like, man, like we're probably like the only people like of Cuban descent. I wish so bad, like I could just go up to these people and just start talking to them. And I was like, man, I gotta learn. Like I'm about to graduate.
Eventually, he quit his job in California as an industrial designer to live in Puerto Rico. Robert enrolled in Spanish Sin Pena, a program based in California for Latinos wanting to reconnect with their culture and learn Spanish.
So a language, if you know it or not, doesn't make you any more or less than. It is something that I've chosen to learn for myself because of my own personal reasons, but definitely don't judge.
Jackie Rodriguez and Wendy Ramirez are the co-founders of Sin Pena. They want to show Latinos that while not knowing Spanish doesn't make someone any less Latino, it can help speakers advocate for their community.
Not being able to speak Spanish and communicate Spanish and identifying with the Latino culture has created a lot of wounds for a lot of people.
So many of us feel isolated in this. Like we feel like we might be the only one who gets made fun of at family parties or the only one who doesn't speak perfectly. So when you join this program and you hear other people who share those same stories at work or at school or share the same path as you, you make that connection and you share that vulnerability.
How difficult was it to learn and catch up?
At the beginning, it was really tough. The first time I talked with my dad, I was like, it was so choppy. Like I couldn't put together sentences. Like I'm a very organized, structured person. So I kind of had my routine and I just kind of stuck to it. Now I feel really good about my Spanish. I like to tell people I feel like it's like a 7 out of 10.
Why do you think it's important for kids to learn Spanish, especially if they have a Latino background?
Well, the first thing I would say is to be Latino or to be Latinx, you don't have to learn Spanish. I think it's definitely a personal decision. But at the same time, for me, it's just been a Pandora's box is the best way to describe it. It just opens this new world for you. You learn about so much more music, so much more content. That's been the most powerful thing.
Such an important message and conversation that's resonating with so many. Para adelante, mis Latinos.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get...
Oh, whoops. Did the wrong thing. Oh. All right. So I hope you found that video enlightening, a little bit entertaining, endearing, and in terms of, so I put the sphere of embodiment up again. And again, what are your reflections on this? What, in terms of language, what's your education around it? And it's not a requirement. Do you feel like your awareness has grown? Has it been complemented? Are these things you're already aware of? Had you already heard of a no sabo kid? It's a term that has surfaced, I think, in the last, maybe 7 or so years. I'm not really sure. I was never called a no sabo kid, but I can feel what that one gentleman was talking about at the beginning of the video. I can feel the dissonance of I get it and I want to laugh about this, but also this kind of sucks. So, all right. That was chapter 2. Thank you for sticking with me so far. Now we're in the final chapter, chapter 3, engaging in this practice. Robin D.G. Kelly says, quote, "Without new visions, we don't know what to build, only what to knock down. We not only end up confused, rudderless, and cynical, but we forget that making a revolution is not a series of clever maneuvers and tactics, but a process that can and must transform us." All right, so this is where I'm going to invite you, if you feel comfortable, to put things in the chat and unmute yourself. But before that, I got to give you kind of a roadmap. Sandra Cisneros says, quote, "I usually say Latina, Mexican-American, or American-Mexican, and in certain contexts, Chicana, depending on whether my audience understands the term or not." So in the Racial Equity Consciousness Institute, after a video is aired like that, we go into our breakout sessions. Now, this one, we're going to stay in the big group. But before that, I'd like you to kind of consider these 4 points. What are your thoughts and key takeaways from all of the 3 videos, or any of the 3 videos? What are your key takeaways? What reflections stood out to you and why? Number 2, in terms of defining narratives. So we talk a lot about narratives in the Institute. These can be articles, activities, books, historical events, images, infographics. Art is really important and I value it a lot. Quotes, videos. So what resources have you found most impactful? Not only just in here, but like what do you bring to the institute? What do you bring to this space that help you develop your dispositions, your knowledge, your awareness and skills? So in other words, your consciousness to examining racial identities. And then a subpoint here is what key insights or lessons have you gained from these resources? I have another video, the final video. If we don't have much engagement, I'll have one more video, which is cool. That has been impactful for me to kind of practice a narrative or sharing a narrative. Number 3, visualizing opportunities. This is one of the opportunities I visualize, and this is how I want to continue it, is bringing this to our communities in the Latino community. So what are areas of opportunity, or what areas of opportunity do you envision yourself examining racial identities personally? How about collectively? What areas of opportunity do you envision yourself examining racial identities with your communities of influence? And then number 4, cultivating commitments. What techniques and strategies can you cultivate personally to examine racial identities? And then collectively, what techniques and strategies can you cultivate collectively with your communities of influence to examine racial identities? So I'm going to mute for a few minutes. We've got about 20 minutes left. And this is where, let's take about 5 minutes to just journal a bit or write something down. You can put something in the chat. Feel free to unmute. You can stay off camera. I totally get that if it feels more comfortable. If you already have something you want to share, please feel free to share it. I'll stay unmuted, but I won't say anything. But if you want to put something in a chat or take some time just to reflect on either one of these 4 points, because this is where we're going to get to engage a little bit.
I feel like the thing for me personally that impacts me as a clinician, I want to focus on 2, is that I don't think it's really resources. I think it's part of educational, continuing education units, but also just meeting an individual where they're at. I think specifically talking about what does being Latinx mean, or depending on what a client and how they identify. Also, the thing, I maybe you touched upon this, but I feel like in the US specifically, being Latinx, Latina, Latino, Latine, isn't necessarily like a racial identity. It's considered only an ethnic group. And I feel like this is where I'm a little confused about racial identity versus ethnic, and like what perspective are we using?
Yeah, that's a good point.
I personally don't agree with it. I want to make that very clear. It's just, this has come up recently with my work, where it's just like, I feel like it kind of takes away, because you might see yourself as Latino, like you're coming from, let's say, Chile, and you just consider yourself to be Chileno, and that's it. You don't really think about the Latinx or Latino Americano or anything like that. It's just, you are your heritage or the country that you're specifically coming from.
Mm-hmm.
But that's like a whole systemic issue, and that's like, I think that's very important to incorporate in conversation, specifically with individuals as well as like ourselves as clinicians or social workers, etc., whatever we do within the community.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I appreciate that. Oh, whoops.
I think piggybacking off of that idea, though, it is important to begin to see that our narratives that we have on national identity are also deeply rooted in racial identity as well. So, for example, Mexico only recently in the past, I think, 10 years recognized Afro-Mexican as an identity within the Mexican identity. Um, and so it is very important that we recognize that um, from many lenses and from many country perspectives, we have had very narrow ideas of what identity can be. And as we move forward, even when we reflect on our past identities or our home culture identities, that there is room for expansion in them, and they are not necessarily mutually exclusive identities. Um, so that's the big thing I've had to realize over time. You know, my family's from Mexico. I'm American. I came to terms with the Mexican American identity, but when realizing I just recently got my Mexican citizenship, what does that mean? What does Mexican identity mean? And untangling a lot of the racialized ideas that come with a certain national identity as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing. And anybody in the audience, regardless of your race, ethnicity, nationality, feel free to unmute. I mean, yes, this is my goal is to, and I ask folks, like, would RISI look different? Would the Racial Equity Consciousness Institute look different from a homogenous group versus a diverse one? Right. And that's kind of what I'm trying to connect with here is like, what does this feel like when my audience, I'm more closely identified with all of you or most of you or whatnot, versus the room that I was a participant in when it was very white and black. I wanted to hear more of my community. So anyway, that's to say that anybody in the audience, you don't have to have a Latinx, Latine, like be Latino to unmute or to share anything in the box, in the chat box. Appreciate everybody though so far, especially the people putting in the chat. We've got some contributions there. And I'll give it probably another minute or so, and then I'll just move into my final video that just is a resource that I enjoyed, and I can see it in RISI as a whole. Perhaps if you have a question, this is also a time maybe for question and answer. I'll do my best to answer. You can kind of open it up for that as well. Okay, well, you'll have definitely an opportunity to, you know, as we wrap up the session, and it, you know, what is it? Got about just a little over 10 minutes, but I'll share my final video with you, and then we'll kind of lead into the remainder of the time we have for any remaining questions or reflections you might have. Is RISI open to the public? Yes. So we have done virtual national well, we've reached national audiences virtually because currently we're based in Pittsburgh, and done some hybrid, lots of in person. So in terms of how the cohorts work is that I'm a point of contact for the Center on Race and Social Problems where RISI is housed. So if you're an organization or if you're a community member and you're interested in learning how you can bring this and you want to hire a facilitator or at least have a conversation about how that looks, yes, definitely it is open and available to the public. And there are cohorts going on now as we speak in various stages of the experience. Thank you for the question. All right, so I'll mute, optimize sound, and we'll just flow into the final video.
Standing amongst the dirt and the barbed wires, the faceless crosses lay across its rusty surface.
A la frontera.
A la pared, running from the Pacific to the Gulf.
A silent cry from those who walked in scorching hot suns by day and below zero temperatures by night.
With only a gallon of water and a prayer in their pockets.
Hoping both will last.
At the shore of Tabasco, 1519, La Leyenda de la Pared,
the legend of the wall,
begins with those who arrived wearing silver skin,
who enslaved the Aboriginals,
and those brought on cargo ships,
who created a system where
the deeper the melanin, the deeper the slashes, ingrains pain into the minds of their kin.
Whitebacks burdened with the mounds of gold at the expense of el indígena y el africano.
False borders created at the Treaty of Hidalgo constructed a wall to separate us from them. On the television screen everywhere, United States 2016.
He says, a nation without a wall is not a nation.
As he envisions it spread across 55 feet of cold concrete, smeared in hues of red, white, and blue.
Because spending $14.4 billion on border enforcement
is not enough. Having thermal sensors that detect the heat coming off of panting figures is not enough.
Shooting hollow point bullets expanding at the impact of human flesh is
not enough. Operation Gatekeeper San Diego, Operation Safeguard Tucson, Operation Hold the Line El Paso are not enough.
A woman holds up a poster with the words, illegals get everything and we get nothing.
Because working from sunrise to sundown for less than $2 an hour in 100-degree weather, getting everything.
Walking 10 to 20 miles by Los Paleteros, but walked hundreds of miles across the border,
getting everything. Standing in the corners of MacArthur Park,
selling mangos con chile by Los Fruteros,
getting everything. Ignoring the backs of los jardineros, begging their spines to be aligned with their ribs.
Waking up before the sun does to pull out weeds of a yard that will never be theirs,
getting everything. A man yells, "It is not fair to let the illegals stay here."
He says as millions cut out their native tongues and close the veins that flow back to their gente. The 1940 bracero still carries our abuelos' fingerprints in the soil of Oxnard. Bringing thousands of Mexicanos to work in Los Campos of el Norte for more than they were used to, but less than they deserved.
My tío's copper skin still lingers with the scent of DDT, sprayed along his bare brazos that pick the fruit that is set on your mahogany tables as a centerpiece. At the wall, U.S.-Mexican border, Texas, 2020. A la frontera.
A la pared.
Faces crosses erased from its gleaming surface.
Replaced with hues of red, white, and blue.
55 feet of cold concrete that runs from the Pacific to the Gulf.
And a cheer from those who used to grouse.
Joyous,
relieved,
grateful, and a silent cry from those who used to walk.
hoping their prayers will last.
Tell us your dishonored names and we will testify. Aquí descansa.
Aquí descansa.
Aquí descansa.
Aquí descansa.
Oye, listen.
All right. Before my final slide of the presentation, if you have any interest in providing feedback for myself and the Institute, you can scan this code with your phone. I'd appreciate any feedback. I'll leave this up for I'll check the chat really quickly. Let's see, how do I feel about RECE's current resources in regard to representing Latinx experiences both within the presentations given during sessions and those listed online? I think this is why I'm giving this presentation, because I don't see myself much in RECE. I don't hear myself much in the Institute. I understand, like geography, naming geography, that plays a part in it. And here in Pittsburgh, there's Casa San Jose, there is the Latino Community Center. There are places that I can bring this to, that we can bring this to, and I have hopes for that. And so in terms of the resources, I want to take some of this, maybe this is how I answer this as well. Like, I'm going to take some of this art, some of these quotes, and add this. And as a facilitator, I think that's how I get to do this. I'm not trying to change anybody's position or how they present as a facilitator. But I think that's how I reflect on this question, is that I want to see myself, I want to see ourselves more in the presentations, as well as online. So thank you for the question. All right, so mil gracias. Thanks for joining me. If you have any questions, you can email me. If you're on LinkedIn, there's the QR code. Again, my name is Gabriel. I appreciate you joining me for the afternoon session, the first afternoon sessions of the conference. I hope you have a fruitful and engaging experience. Feel free to reach out, send me an email, connect on LinkedIn, and I hope this was beneficial for your time.